Looks like we're waiting on Donna. Is there anyone else? Dr. Adams, were you able to get the information, the password to Ms. Jones?
I spoke to her. She is getting on at this point in time, but yes.
Okay, I'm going to give her one more minute, and but otherwise we'll go ahead and get started here very shortly. So we are already in session as we came from closed session. So the first item on our open session agenda is the June consent agenda. Are there any, and we have quite a number here. So I think if you have a question, if you can say the name of the consent agenda item and then just a little bit about what it's about, that'll, I think, help everyone follow along. Are there any questions on the June consent agenda?
Do you want to discuss the questions that we've already sent or new questions that are coming up?
So this would be an opportunity for any board member to get clarification on the questions or responses, or discuss with other board members. So it could be something that you've previously submitted and received an answer to, but it could, in theory, also be a new question. But we're on the June consent agenda items only.
Okay, Dorothy, I have a question.
Sure.
It's specific to 060920-15. It was a walk-on item at our last board meeting. And it's concerning virtual learning. So I have maybe 3 or 4 questions. My first question being, is this replacing the virtual learning from last year?
Well, so first, if I'm correct, is Dr. Adams, is this the one that we moved up to the May meeting, and so this has already been approved?
If I'm looking at it correctly, that answer is yes.
I know it's been approved. I still have some questions regarding it. And the reason I have those questions is because it was moved up. It should have been on this agenda, but we brought it to May because there was a time constraint. May I proceed?
Sure. I guess I'm wondering why these questions weren't posed before the vote to they would have had an impact on the approval or not approval of the item.
I didn't have enough information because it was a walk-on item. And when we received it, I didn't have the June consent agenda before me. We approved it without the June consent agreement before us because it was an emergency.
So the June consent agenda items were in our May board book. They're always included a month ahead.
The documentation wasn't included, or I didn't see the documentation. And so I have a few questions. Now I can talk with Dr. Adams offline if that would help precipitate our moving forward, but I have questions that I need answers for.
So you can't, I mean, I'm not trying to say that you can't ask them here. I'm just questioning what is the intent and why were you waiting?
Why was I waiting?
So, because it's been 2 weeks.
I just had an opportunity to process it in such a way that I have questions now that I didn't have before me then.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Again, we're replacing a virtual learning program that we had before. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Roberts.
And this program is specific to our virtual learning program, separate and apart from what we're doing for COVID-19.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. This is an online program. I think it's, a person view it as virtual or online, but it is an online program. The virtual program that we're using right now because of the pandemic is the teacher engage with the student, with those specific students in the classroom. This would be, this particular program is a program where kids are saying, I'm not coming to SLP school, but I'm going to do virtual learning or online learning. And so it's a little bit different. I look at them as two separate programs, virtual because of the pandemic and online.
Okay, so will this online program that we voted for, will it provide a site license per child or per course?
It is my understanding it is a site license per child, and the kid can take up to the number of courses they need. I can get you a specific answer because that's a little bit more detailed, the nuances of, but I can get you exactly the answer to that question.
Okay, well, what I will do then is I will make arrangements so that, because I have probably about 6 other questions that I can talk with you directly about.
Yes,
And I
ma'am.
will send them to you and give you an opportunity to respond and we can chat about it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Are there other questions on the June consent agenda? Okay, so moving.
Oh,
sorry,
hold on,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was trying to get my mouse connected. I did have some concerns that I had followed up on. I wasn't sure if you had shared those with the rest of the board, but Dr. Adams, I believe, is going to get those to us at some point in the future soon. So I guess expect those at some point and hopefully we can discuss or at least consider before voting.
Ms. Val, I spoke to the entity today and you will have answers to those questions tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Dr. Adams.
You're welcome.
Hello. I did have a question, please, on the June agenda. Can
Yes,
you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Donna, we can hear you.
It's kind of different because I'm on my cell phone now. But it was about the contract with Southwest. This contract just for 1 more year. And I guess I'm asking because I know that we're not going to be providing the same amount of meals that we have, like we did last year. And just wondering if we would be able to utilize more local vendors versus someone that is from out of state, trying to make sure that we are, staying in house a little bit more with our finances. That's just a question. I guess I just wanted to ask Dr. Adams about Southwest and their contract. I know people are depending upon their jobs and it's kind of late in the day with the vendors, but it would just seem that with COVID going on and we're not sure about the numbers to take on such a big contract once again. I just wonder what his plans are for that.
So, Ms. Jones, first of all, thank you. I think this contract has 1 more year left after this year. I'll double check to see. We have to put it out for bid, and obviously we evaluate the companies that apply. If I am correct, when we did Southwest, there were only 2 other large companies that applied. We normally don't get a large number of bidders for food service contracts to this extent. And so I will do a deep dive to find out when it goes out on bid again, but you are correct. At this point in time, it's late to do anything at this point in time. If the board wants me to put it out for bid at the end of this year or sometimes around January, February, if you inform me of that, we can put it back out on bid again and see what we get and see who might apply. But I think I remember correctly last time, there were 2 other vendors outside of Southwest that did apply for this particular contract, and Southwest was the one that won the bid. But I'll give you some more information once I talk to Ms. Althea tomorrow.
Okay, and I guess, Dr. Adams, once you do that, I think I'm thinking about our people who are here in St. Louis, utilizing more of our people who are in St. Louis when it comes to spending our money on food versus out of state.
So are you talking about, and so I want to be clear so I can ask the right question. Are you talking about, example, Southwest is a company, but asking them or gearing them to try to get local produce and those kinds of things from local companies? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, no, not just local produce, but I'm just thinking in terms of, we have other people here, like local restaurants and what have you, that perhaps we can start to utilize some of our local businesses in terms of providing food, especially those who have been so helpful during the COVID pandemic and helping with feeding our families, that we, kind of take care of our own here in St. Louis versus sending so much money out of state right now.
Gotcha.
That's my only suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So the other thing that I have sort of some concerns about are Mr. Carroll's, I guess, contract renewal. I didn't see a copy of the contract in the board book. I don't know if that wasn't in there or if I didn't get the copy, but it would be helpful for us to see that. And I had requested if maybe we could form some sort of evaluation, like a vendor performance report to discuss in closed session, but that is definitely not something that we can do because it is a vendor. So I was wondering if anyone else had any input or concerns or questions or comments. I would really like to hear other people's feedback on that.
So I'll jump in right quick and then shut up and let the ball go. You will have a copy of the contract. I have gotten a copy of the previous contract from last year, so that will be part of the response. The other question I got on yesterday or day before yesterday, there are 2 entities that I see as the board's responsibility. Is the wrong word. I will do whatever the board asks me to do. But Mr. Carroll is the board's lobbyist. And so I didn't do a vendor performance report because I view it as the board's lobbyist, just like I do with Council of Great City Schools. But I can obviously give my impression of what the services were and what occurred. If you give me direction, i.e. board, in terms of you want me to do it as opposed to you doing it in those 2 cases. So that's the only reason, Vice President Val, that I did not do a vendor performance report, because I thought it was really the board's role because he is hired by the board. The previous RFPs have been, the lobbyist has been selected by the board, not necessarily by administration. So I'll take the guidance I'll take the guidance of the board in terms of how they want me to proceed.
I definitely agree. It is the board's responsibility, and I don't know if there's any interest in anybody formalizing that, but usually when somebody stands up in a meeting and says somebody should, the person who is saying that should be the person that does it. So I will volunteer to come up with some sort of rubric. If that is the wish of the board, if that is the will of the board. But I do think that we need some sort of guidance on how we are judging and analyzing our contractors who essentially work directly for us.
So I think that's a great idea. So there's some type of tracking data that goes into the performance here. Question on your timing. How would you, knowing that this is up for a vote in 2 weeks, how are you suggesting that we put this in place for the following year, or do you want to create a rubric and evaluation prior to renewal?
I mean, I could do a rough draft that everyone could look over and consider, send it out to the board and everyone could consider individually, but I don't think it's something we could realistically really implement until the next contract renewal.
So I have a suggestion. I personally don't think that it's a board member's responsibility to develop a document of that a document such as that. So what I'm asking is that, somebody or Dr. Adams, if you would look into someone taking on the task of doing some research around what other boards are doing, or boards are doing across the United States as it relates to them having a lobbyist. And if they do evaluations on that specific individual, what does that evaluation look like? Because sometimes we don't have to recreate the wheel. The documents are already there. Perhaps this is something that we would obtain from the MSBA instead of having a specific board member to take on this task.
And I agree with Susan on that point. We can also utilize the Council of Great City Schools, who does this across the nation, in addition to perhaps what MSBA may have. But I agree that it should be done by an external entity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that I was going to write it all myself, but just that I would take the lead if needed on kind of looking into that and bringing something to the board.
I'd like to say something in terms of our lobbyist. Over the years, even when we were in exile and the board, the elected board wasn't able to participate with the lobbyist, we didn't get any information from our lobbyist. And I don't think the public was made aware of the results of his efforts during that time. And I just want to make sure that this go around that the public is well aware of the results of whatever our lobbyist is doing, because after all, he is being paid with taxpayer dollars. And many of the people just don't get the information that he has put together. And so we're spending a lot of money and not making the public aware of the issues in Jefferson City that are facing us at this time. That's all. Thank you.
Dr. Adams, I have a question about, I think it's item 28, laser.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we're done with this conversation on the rubric and the evaluation of Mr. Carroll. Now, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Donna said. Since those legislative reports do go out to the full board, they are public record, correct? I mean, they would be sunshineable. So is there any problem with district staff or the board itself making those public to people maybe on the SLPS website more accessibly?
And what documents, I'm sorry, would we be talking about?
The legislative report, the weekly legislative report sent out by Mr. Carroll. Donna was saying that since we are spending taxpayer dollars on this entity, that it should be the public who is more informed than they have been historically.
Yes, the board can certainly make those documents available to the public.
Thank you.
And then Dr. Adams, I just wanted to see, would it be possible to have someone from your team look into how other districts evaluate their lobbyists prior to contract renewal?
Yes, I will get something from Council of Great City Schools tomorrow with MSBA and forward what I get to the board in entirety, and then the board will give us direction.
Great, thank you. Anything else on the lobbyist discussion?
One last thing. I guess I'm hesitant to say it in a full public meeting, but I do think it needs to be said that there was some hesitance in disclosing the contributions that have been made by our lobbyists when I requested that information. Hopefully we will have that to make an informed decision. Again, I hope that we could discuss this in more of a closed session. I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but I do think that transparency is essential. One of the things that concerned me is that one of the other clients is Excalibur International, which is a tobacco manufacturing company. So I'm wondering if there are any conflicts there as to what is best for kids, what legislators are choosing to do with any contributions and lobbying efforts that are sent that way. So just looking very carefully at other entities and making sure that they are all in line with what is in the best interest of St. Louis City families and SLPS students. And I do think it might be a good idea for the board to consider putting out another RFP just in the interest of fairness. Mr. Carroll has been with us a long time and he's done a good job. I believe that he has been very effective in Jefferson City, but it does seem like we're not being transparent or open with the public if we don't make this process open. If it just seems like we're continually renewing one person's contract, as it almost seems like favoritism. So I think we need to be very careful about how we approach this because it is somebody who works almost directly, specifically for the board. So those were kind of my thoughts. I wanted to see where everyone else was at on that.
Natalie, I'm not sure I was following you in that discourse, but the information that Mr. Carroll does share with us is a matter of public record, and that you can share it, I can share it, and at some point that's what I've been doing so that the public is aware of what's going on in Jeff City and what our positions are. And so again, I'd like to wait for some external input and go from there.
Okay, so let's wait for the follow-up from Dr. Adams about a rubric or other type of evaluative form from other districts, and we will go from there. Adam, you had a question.
Yes, Dr. Adams, 2 questions. I don't think they'll be too in-depth, but the Laserfish contract, I just want to clarify. I know it doesn't say renewal, but is this a new contract with them for the HR services?
What item number is that? I'm sorry.
28, I believe.
Are we done on the other topic?
So there weren't any additional follow-up questions.
Okay, so we're finished on that topic.
On the lobbyist, yes.
Thank you.
That is a new program. It is a software management program to help the HR department manage its personnel files, particularly active for the employee relations department.
Okay. And well, all right. So then the second question is just, it's not really related to the first one, but just from my understanding, again, being new to how the district does contracts, what is and maybe this is a Mr. St. Omer question, or maybe not, but when it comes to like sole source contracts, I think to me that means that if we are asking for a service be provided in a certain area, that we're only allowing one type of vendor to provide that resource or fill that gap. But is that the district's definition of sole source? Because I know I've seen like a couple of not competing contracts, but where we've had like ed tech services for the same type of technology, and they've said sole source, but we've used like 2 different vendors. Like we might use HP and Apple, and they're both sole source, but they're providing the same. So I think just from my understanding how we define sole source, so that I can do a better job in my due diligence of contract review.
Yeah, Mrs. St. Omer, you mind jumping into that one?
I actually don't know that I have the answer off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that information. But I don't know what the district's use of sole source in its contracting.
That works for me. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question? I don't think it's necessarily a point of order, but I do wonder why there are questions being asked during these meetings that I don't see going out in the call for questions beforehand. It feels like there's a lot of things that we're asking the administration and the district to do that isn't sort of part of the protocol and the process that we've put together. And so I would love to see these questions going out so that there's preparation and like enough time for everyone to answer beforehand.
Is that
I
a
agree
question
with
or a
that,
comment?
Tracy. Oh, Sorry, go ahead, Adam.
I just want to know if that's a question or a comment.
It wasn't a question.
Well, I guess my question would be, I know, Dorothy, you did open it up to say if people had additional questions. So if we're not allowed to ask additional questions, why is there a space for it? Do you have an issue with the space that there is for additional questions?
Not about being allowed or not allowed. It's about what is going to result in getting the best information. And so, you know, sometimes there are questions that people need to do a little research or digging to be able to provide information for. And if we are doing those on the spot in a meeting, there is the opportunity to get you an answer. And so there's a holdup on the transfer of information, both between board members and superintendent, but also between board members and the public. So it doesn't accomplish the goal of getting information out. So to the extent possible, it's always better to submit them ahead of time so you can actually have the answer it is that you're seeking and be able to act on it. Sometimes there are follow-up questions that come out after reading through the responses that we get, or sometimes there may be quick questions, or in addition, this is also an opportunity for board members to discuss with each other the contracts and MOUs that come before us. And so we aren't able to via email our thoughts and feelings about every MOU and contract, but when there is questioning towards the administration that requires research, we need to be respectful and do that ahead of time.
Completely understand that, Dorothy, but I also I'm just trying to figure out what the issue is if a question comes to me as I'm reviewing this before a board meeting, or if a question comes to me because another question was posed by a board member, why that's a problem for some board members that board members are asking questions.
If I were guessing, I would say that there is a process that the board has created and developed and has been using over the past year that is not being used by all board members. So it is disrespectful to board members who put in the time ahead of time to do their due diligence and research and read through the board book to put questions out on the spot that we can't actually get information back on.
I'd add that when I think of time for additional questions, it's so that we can all follow up together on the things that we have submitted and find to be important. And so to have things posed at the last minute just feels like, yeah, not only a waste of time, but sort of doing disservice to the topic.
I don't see how it's the last minute for posing questions that we're approving in 2 weeks.
So I think this conversation has run its course. I will ask that all board members follow the process to the extent possible, submitting questions ahead of time so you are able to actually get information, data, and responses appropriately back from the superintendent.
And I've asked questions in session and I've gotten them in a time that I feel is responsive for the decisions that I need to make. So I will continue to do that.
But it's not just you. So all board members have access to this information.
I was just speaking for me. So I said, I will continue to do that. So I wasn't speaking for other board members. I was speaking for myself.
Right, but we are a board that's making decisions in the best interest of the district. And it sounds to me like you're saying blatantly you will not be following the processes of the board.
I didn't say that. I said if I have additional questions that I need to ask and those questions come up in session, I will continue to ask those questions because I feel like it's my right to ask those questions. And if people have problems with that, they can state every single work session and board meeting that they have problems with it and use their breath in the best way they see fit.
Are there questions on the consent agenda? So moving on, the next order of business is the board officer election procedure. So we're following the additional or the procedures the same as we have followed last year and honestly in previous years. They are outlined in our bylaws, but you also have a document in your email that goes a little bit more step by step that we can use within the meeting. So I would ask, are there any questions or discussion from the board on the process for board officer elections or the duties of the officers?
Dorothy, I have a comment.
Sure.
I think a number of issues that have come up this evening need to be a part of our work agenda. And heretofore, it appears that a lot of our work session agendas is operational rather than governance. And so I'd like to put the two concerns that came up this evening on our work session agenda.
So what are the concerns and which work session agenda?
The next work session agenda would be fine. And the concerns about following board norms, I think that was what was implied in this last exchange.
So you said there were two concerns?
Yeah, I'll send you an email. But again, I think this needs to be a part of our work session agenda. We do a lot of operation things on our work session. We need to do more about governance because some of this speaks to governance, the issues that came up today.
So we can certainly have a discussion about board norms again. So let's see, it was in the, I believe, December or January meeting that we looked at those norms. We can certainly do so again. It's been about 6 months, so that timing feels appropriate.
Thank you.
Are there any questions, though, on the officer election procedures or duties of officers as those are happening at our June meeting for bylaw?
I don't have a question necessarily about the officer duties or the election process. Just in the past, we have discussed at least one work session prior who might be interested in stepping up to take what role. And I believe that in our training that was discouraged against, or at least discussing it in certain ways was discouraged. So I was wondering if there was any clarification you could provide on that.
So the agenda item is on the officer procedures or the duties of officers. This is not a discussion of who is or is not interested.
Correct. Thank you.
Dorothy, what exactly are the procedures? I don't remember that we went over any for our last election, so maybe I'm missing something. What exactly are those procedures?
So I sent an email out to you yesterday, included the agenda for this meeting tonight, and also the bylaw that details the board officer duties, and a separate PDF. I'm trying to pull it up now. I'm sorry. A separate PDF of the election procedures as they are outlined in our bylaw. I can send that email to you. I don't have a way to share my screen.
Okay, I got the documents.
Yes.
I read through those. I thought the procedure was something different. Something
no,
more like what Natalie spoke to, that we had a discussion about it prior to the election. That didn't happen the last cycle. And I'm hoping that we can do that prior to in some way.
We cannot do that. As Natalie stated, that a discussion of that nature typically falls into the category of a vote. So this is about the
A vote to get some information and ask questions requires a vote.
Maybe I'm not understanding what your question is. So this is about the step-by-step procedure, which you can certainly ask questions on.
Okay.
What we cannot do is have I think it's called a de facto vote on coming to a consensus on who wants to be an officer.
No, I wasn't anywhere near that. I just wanted a simple conversation, not a de facto vote or anything, something that would make the process so much clearer, because we didn't have this direction last year.
So we had at the last year I had a similar agenda item where we discussed the officer duties and the procedure.
Okay.
Are there questions on the procedure or the duties? With that, is there a motion to adjourn and move back into closed session?
I move that we adjourn and move back into closed session per 610.021.
Second,
Ms. Bell?
Ms. D. Jones,
Yes.
S. Jones,
yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. Bowell,
Yes.
Ms. Rhodey Collins.
Yes. And just point of clarification, should we use the first link that we had previously, or should we expect a new one? Dr. Adams, you're on mute.
Yes, Mrs. Vanoy just emailed me, use the old one that we did first meeting. Yes.
Okay, great,
Go back.
thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.